Earlier this week, as I was saying earlier, the Senate passed other legislation called the Lands Bill, but it's really about land conservation. It's about ensuring that we have the ability to protect treasures around our great country. There were two provisions that were in this Lands Bill that were very important for Ohio. One had to do with something called the Ohio and Erie Canalway National Heritage Area. You've probably heard of the Erie Canal, ran through Ohio and New York, Pennsylvania, other states. The National Heritage Area is a 110-mile route on that canal from Cleveland to New Philadelphia, Ohio. And it follows the route of the canals that went along the Cuyahoga River. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. It's the 87-mile trail that is now enjoyed by 2.5 million visitors a year that we wanted to be sure and protect in this legislation. I've been there, my family's been there. It's a great place to hike, great place to bicycle, great place to go bird watching, great place to just enjoy time with your family. And it's our history that we're preserving. The Canalway was established as a National Heritage Area by Congress in 1996. And although Congress has authorized funding for the Ohio Erie Canalway Heritage Area through fiscal year 2021, we had reached a funding cap this year, which meant we were at risk of losing about $100,000. That may not sound like much in the context of the federal budget, but $100,000 is a big deal to the Canalway. Why? Because we use the federal money to leverage private money and state and local money. And it's a critical part of making sure that we continue to have this beautiful treasure in our state that brings 2.5 million visitors a year, has a lot of economic benefits to our area. So Senator Brown from Ohio and I have promoted this. We know that this limited federal funding is going to be critical to leveraging those public-private partnerships, help creating 4,200 jobs in the region, generating $408 million in economic benefits. It's important to have that kind of stable funding in our heritage areas so they can continue to do what they do, tell our nation's rich history and provide the recreational opportunities to people I represent. So I'm glad that was included in the lands package. There was also another piece of legislation that was passed. It was a bill that Senator Cardin from Maryland and I had been promoting. It's called the Migratory Birds of Americas Act. And it reauthorizes the Fish and Wildlife Program that promotes long-term conservation, research, and habitat protection for more than 380 different species of migratory birds. This is a big deal to our state in Ohio. We're a big bird-watching state. We have a lot of migratory species, including our state bird, the cardinal. George Voinovich, whose seat I hold, was a big champion for this program in his time in the Senate. And he used to talk about the importance of this from an economic point of view, and it's true. Bird watching brings more than 75,000 visitors a year to just one single birding event in Ohio. For the birders who are listening, you probably know it. It's in Northwest Ohio at the Maumee Bay State Park. It's called the biggest week in American birding, and polls have ranked it as the top birding event in the country. We like to think it is. There's a study out of Bowling Green that indicates that bird watching around Lake Erie has contributed more than $26 million annually to our local economy, $26 million a year, and has created almost 300 jobs. So passage of this legislation is great news for us. It's about protecting that habitat in Ohio, but also the habitat where these birds go in the wintertime. They're snowbirds, they go south, to ensure they're going to come back and ensure we can continue to have that economic benefit and enjoy that natural beauty. So I commend Senators Murkowski, Cantwell, Manchin for working to get this legislation through the Senate. I look forward to the House taking it up. It also has a good provision in there for helping our sportsmen, ensuring that we have public access to public lands. So my hope is that can move forward and we can ensure that we begin to deal with the issues that were addressed in that lands package. One thing that was not addressed in the lands package that I want to be sure we don't lose sight of is the condition of our national parks. Now, this is, again, if you're going to talk about the treasures of our country, you got to put the national parks right at the top. We have this amazing park system that's the envy of so many other countries around the world and the reason so many foreign visitors come to our country. The national parks now attract 330 million visitors annually. And by the way, more visitors in the last few years than in the previous few years. So it's actually going up some These 330 million visitors come to see 84 million acres of parks and historical sites. Again, it's a huge economic boon to our country because a lot of people come in from outside the country, but also for the local areas where people travel to get a beautiful vacation with their family, one they can afford. So we need to do everything we can do to hold our parks up. Here's the problem. We have over time funded the parks' day-to-day operations, but not funded their longer-term maintenance problems. So think of a building that has a roof that is leaking. Now we're funding the program within that building and the naturalists, but what we're not funding is the actual reconstruction of that building. It's called a maintenance backlog. That backlog has grown and grown and grown over the years to the point we now have a $12 billion maintenance backlog at our parks. And the park funding that we provide every year can't come close to providing that funding. So what some of us have done over the years is tried to bring attention to this and to figure out a way to get funding that was specifically focused on how to ensure that our national parks don't continue to deteriorate. Again, they're such a beautiful part of our country, our history, and our culture. We've got to preserve that legacy. In Ohio, we have 8 national parks, including Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Cuyahoga Valley National Park is one of the top 14 visited parks in the country. We're very proud of that. Whether it's biking or hiking or fishing or kayaking, 2.7 million visitors a year go to Cuyahoga Valley. I'm one of them. I like to do all of that there. So these parks need to be sure that they can continue to be this treasure for the future. The infrastructure, the water infrastructure, the roads, the buildings, the bridges, they're all deteriorating to the point where actually some of them can't be used. If you go to a national park today, you may see that there's a trail closed or there's a visitor center that can't be visited. You may see that some of the campgrounds are closed or some of the bathrooms are closed because those facilities have not been able to keep up with their, again, deferred maintenance. So I think we should be putting more money into deferred maintenance and bringing our parks up to speed and addressing this $12 billion backlog than the idea of expanding parks. We ought to be focused more on the stewardship of the parks we have. And that $12 billion is impossible to find within the parks budget that we have. Think about your own house. If you allow deferred maintenance to build up, you don't take care of the roof, as an example, what happens? Well, you get a leak in the roof, and then pretty soon your drywall is ruined, and pretty sure you find out that your floor is ruined, and the costs mount up. That's what's happening in our parks. So as we're not fixing the deferred maintenance, we're creating other costs and other problems, and I've seen it. I've gone to 4 of our larger parks in Ohio to see specifically what their priorities are in terms of deferred maintenance. One is a leaky roof, another is a bridge, another is a part of a railroad track that runs through it that is a tourism railroad track. Another is a seawall on Lake Erie. And if that's not fixed, it then causes other damage. So my hope is that we can, on a bipartisan basis, deal with this because these problems compound. They get worse and worse if you don't deal with them. We can't wait any longer to address these maintenance needs. So even though we don't have the Yellowstones in Ohio, we don't have, Grand Tetons, we don't have Yosemite, we don't have huge parks like that, we have a $100 million backlog in our deferred maintenance at our smaller parks in Ohio, $100 million. I toured Cuyahoga Valley National Park with Superintendent Craig Kenkel and Deb Yolanda, who's CEO of the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Deb is also president of the National Association of Friends Groups for our parks, and they are fantastic, these Friends Groups. They provide a lot of funding for the parks, private sector funding, and I think it's an incredibly important part of our overall park funding, but they can't afford these maintenance projects either. More than $45 million at Cuyahoga Valley alone today in unmet maintenance needs, $875,000 for badly needed renovations for their Welcome Center. I've been there, I've seen it, they need it. More than $3 million to renovate parking lots that are crumbling. More than $2 million for trail repair for the extensive trail system throughout the park. I've also been again to our other parks in Ohio and seen what some of the deferred maintenance is. At the Perry Victory International Peace Memorial, which is up on Lake Erie, $47.7 million is needed in long-delayed maintenance, which includes millions in repairs to, again, replace the cracks that are in the seawall there to enable the rest of the monument to continue to exist. And the visitor center has to be made ADA compatible, and it needs repairs. So everything that we talk about here in terms of the parks is normally very positive. Democrats, Republicans alike love the parks. People in America love our parks. But I think they are surprised to learn the fact that just underneath the surface, our parks are crumbling. We've got to do more to ensure they're going to be enjoyed for generations to come. From 2006 until 2017, annual visitation increased by 58 million people. So as these needs are growing, more people are coming, putting more and more pressure on the parks. Keeping up with its aging infrastructure and increased visitation has really stretched the Park Service and required them to focus on just their very immediate maintenance needs and postponing or delaying these other projects. We can't continue to use these Band-Aids. We've got to address the underlying issue. I view it as kind of a debt unpaid. You know, this is deferred maintenance that has built up over the last couple of decades that we should have addressed and we didn't, and now we need to go back and do it to ensure it doesn't cause additional costs. So this week I've reintroduced legislation I've worked on Congress in the last 3 Congresses. This legislation I reintroduced with 3 of my colleagues, Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, Senator Angus King of Maine, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and 1 independent. That makes it tripartisan. It's called Restore Our Parks Act. Again, it's a common sense solution to deal with this $12 billion backlog of long overdue maintenance projects. I want to thank my colleagues for stepping up and working on this together, and we have. We've had different proposals out there. Senator Warner came up with this idea that we have of using the offshore and onshore revenue from oil and gas drilling. We combined with a bill that Senator Alexander and Senator King had put forward. There are others who have great ideas. Senator Steve Daines from Montana is one of our strong supporters, who's chair of the National Parks Subcommittee at the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and as he says, grew up in the shadow of Yellowstone Park. So we've got lots of colleagues on both sides of the aisle who care about this and are involved with it, and I want to thank them for all of their hard work. It was Senator Alexander who told me that in the 100-year history of our national parks, there has never been a single bill more important than this one. And that's saying a lot, because since Teddy Roosevelt decided to acquire this land for our national parks, there have been lots of ways we've tried to help the parks, including recently legislation that I drafted on the centennial of the parks that helps us get more public-private money into the parks, and that's good. But it's not enough to handle these incredible $12 billion deferred maintenance costs that we have now. So the legislation creates what's called a Legacy Restoration Fund, which will get half of all the annual energy revenues over the next 5 years that are not otherwise allocated to be used for priority deferred maintenance projects. This is royalties from, again, onshore and offshore energy development. The Trump administration is doing more of that development, so there's more revenue coming in. The bill caps the deposits into the fund at $1.3 billion annually. So no matter what, even if there's a lot more money coming in, we're going to have a cap of 1.3 annually, which would provide a total of $6.5 billion for deferred maintenance projects over the next 5 years. Now, I said $12 billion earlier, and that's the amount. But of the urgent priorities, it's about $6.5 billion. That's how we came up with that number. So what we're trying to do is at least let's address the urgent priorities in the next 5 years, using the revenues that are coming into our government from these offshore and onshore energy projects, oil and gas projects. And again, if it's allocated to something else, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we don't touch it. It's just funding that's not already allocated somewhere else. Last year, we had 37 co-sponsors here in the Senate for this legislation, Republicans and Democrats alike, more than 1/3 of this chamber. A similar House bill, our House companion bill, had 234 members co-sponsoring it, more than the 218 needed, more than the majority. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee reported this bill out on a bipartisan basis last fall. I was on the committee. We had a good debate about it. We reported it out with a 19-4 vote. Now, there's not a lot we do around here that's that bipartisan. We received overwhelming support from conservation and outdoor recreation groups. This includes the National Parks and Conservation Association, the Outdoor Industry Alliance, the National Trust for Public Land, Pew Charitable Trust, and others. At our hearing we had on the legislation last year, the director of the Pew Charitable Trust said it well, quote, "Supporting this bipartisan bill is a wise investment for our national park system and overwhelming support from the American public, generates hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars for the economy each year, and provides access to world-class recreation opportunities and helps preserve our natural history. Yes, the parks do all of that, and that's why it's so important that we preserve them and ensure that this long-term problem gets addressed now. I'm proud to introduce the legislation in the Senate this week, and I'm proud that the House companion bill is being introduced today by Representatives Bishops and Representative Kilmer. I look forward to working with my colleagues to get this bill across the finish line. I want to thank the senators who already signed up as co-sponsors. I hope we can continue to build support for this and get this common sense bill done to help preserve our national treasures. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time. I note the absence of a quorum.